And I think that's why this book we're talking about today is so special because WrestleMania 3 and that whole kind of period of the mid 80s rock and wrestling movement was the point that so many people became converted to the world of wrestling. The first thing I want to say before we jump into talking about the book is, I'm not just paying lip service here. This book is genuinely superb. I've already read it a couple of times. I'm not just putting it over because you're my guest, Keith, or you're my friend, but it is genuinely tremendous because, this is much, much more than a book on WrestleMania 3. And for anyone who maybe wasn't necessarily watching a product at this period and thinks, oh, I don't need a whole book on WrestleMania 3, very much you've put that book at the centerpiece of the narrative. But this is a story that's really about exploring the wide world of sports entertainment and how this vision that Vince McMahon had in the 1980s paved the way for the WWE that we see today. You touch on so much in this book, from all the different territories that were affected by Vince's takeover, if you will, all the way through to the impact it had on the British wrestling product, and up to where we are today with the juggernaut that is WWE. So I love this book. I think it's tremendous, and I'm going to encourage everyone to go out and get a copy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it was important to me, as it always is, to put every story in context. Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm reading a book now, came out in 2022, about the New York Knicks, my basketball team, about their exploits through the 1990s. Okay. And I'm studying it to see how this author, whose name is Chris Herring, took a decade and could tell that story and keep your attention. And he did that by making different characters bigger with each story. As he talks about the various seasons, he tends to focus on one member of the team or the coach or, a member of a rival squad. But one way or another, it's a narrative that's very smooth because, you always need to learn how to tell a good story. Cool. I read your book, I learned things there. I think, you can't write without reading.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when I saw that you were bringing this book out, I mean, what immediately jumped out at me is, and it took me a minute to really think, oh, why is he centering it around this? Because the obvious choice I would have thought at the starting point was to write a book about the birth of WrestleMania. But then you realize how giant WrestleMania 3 was. What inspired you to write this book and place WrestleMania 3 right at the heart of, this deep dive into wrestling in the 80s?
This occurred after around the week of WrestleMania 39. I was in Los Angeles and I found myself getting into conversations with people. WrestleMania week is a fantastic week. And I haven't been to any of the Clash at the Castles, but Kenny McIntosh, our mutual friend and associate, has told me the vibe was similar to WrestleMania. So you're just walking down the street and you're running into wrestling fans. I mean, I remember in LA, I got in on a Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, I go to the cafe for breakfast and I'm wearing a GCW sweatshirt, a Game Changer Wrestling sweatshirt. Some guy at the next table begins talking to me. And he said he trained at Rikishi's training school. And from that moment forward, till I got on the plane back to New York, I don't think I had one non-wrestling related conversation. Yeah. And so, I was having all these discussions with people. And a consistent theme was, how did we get here to WrestleMania? Because this past WrestleMania week included in excess of 100 events besides WrestleMania. Some of those were WWE events. Some of those were indie wrestling shows. Kenny and Stuart and we went to a wrestling themed drag show. my friends Randy and Susie Tyson, who opened a wrestling themed bar in Las Vegas. We went to a female lucha show.
Wow.
So, there was all these different things going on the entire week. I didn't go, but our friend who's part of the Inside the Ropes digital, he does a podcast on there with our friend Ali Assad. He went to the Undertaker's one-man show. And so we're back at Kenny's, hotel room, and Assad is calling us, him and his wife, to just come out of the Undertaker's show. So he's giving us a play-by-play of what we missed.
Wow.
And, how did we get there? When I was growing up, professional wrestling was extremely fringe. So how is it that cities now bid to have WrestleMania there and even SummerSlam?
Yeah.
And that these events now extend 2 nights, and it's a gathering, it's a pilgrimage. And I found myself continuously arguing that WrestleMania 3 was the turning, because that's when WWF was able to sell out an NFL stadium. There had been other stadium shows, I believe, back in the 1930s in Greece. There were sellouts when Jim Landis wrestled over there. But I'd say since World War II, there had not been, as far as I know, any stadium shows that sold out for professional wrestling. It was Carney, and this sold out. And had we get there, and I think it's when Vince McMahon was able to fill up that stadium, and it sent a message to sponsors, licensees, media conglomerates that this is, you might condescend to it, but it's worthy entertainment. It's money generating entertainment. It is a pure entertainment form. And it also, in some way, legitimized professional wrestling to the point where people could now tell their boss, I'm going to need a few days off from work because I'm going to WrestleMania. And they wouldn't say, are you a moron? Maybe they would behind their backs.
Yep.
But, suddenly it didn't seem to matter whether it was a work or a shoes.